Hey everyone, welcome into Up to the Second College Football, Episode 6. We do it for the Saturdays, and I have a huge guest on the show, the Boz, the guy with the great haircut from back in the day. You guys know who I'm talking about. Brian Bosworth, going to talk a little Texas versus OU. And we're going to discuss, is it Georgia, Bama, and just everybody else? It sure feels that way. We've got a report from A&M versus Alabama right here in College Station. Billy Liucci going to be joining us, breaking it all down, plus Tony Tsoukalas also breaking it down for Alabama's point of view. We've got reports from Ole Miss. We've got reports from Georgia, plus Joel Anderson of Slate.com. It is Up to the Second College Football. Watch it now. All right, guys, now we're going to focus on the Red River Showdown. Undefeated Oklahoma, one-loss Texas, and we're joined by College Football Hall of Famer Brian Bosworth, who I know in the 80s I had his haircut. Most of you guys did as well, and we're going to break things down here on the show from an Oklahoma perspective. Boz, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you, sir. So I got to ask you, there's been a lot of close games this year with Oklahoma, yet they're still undefeated. How good of a team are they in your perspective?
Well, they haven't played a complete game as of yet. They've had, a quarter and a half here and there, not necessarily on all three phases, but, I guess that indicates that we're pretty good because we've got 5 W's. Obviously, Oklahoma's, support has always been one of we want to win 50-0, and anything else is unacceptable. But, college football, it's tough to win in college football. You got 11 guys on the other side that have just as much passion, and they want to win as well, especially when you get teams like in Oklahoma and Texas that you're playing against. Those marquee matchups, they can make and break the momentum of an opposing team if they can somehow pull off an upset. So the good thing is there's great things that you see on the field for both teams. There's things that are fixable, things that both teams are going to continue to work on throughout the season. Both teams are very much in the race to win the Big 12. And this game always comes down to mistakes that are made and being able to dominate the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, which both teams have struggled to do consistently through their first 5 games. So I've seen bits and pieces of domination on both teams. It's just a matter of being able to settle down, eliminate the penalties, the stupid mistakes, the miss assignments, and then get after your opponent for 60 full minutes. And those are the teams that have historically won this battle in the Texas-Oklahoma series.
So how big is Bijan Robinson going to be for Texas then? The key to stopping Texas is obviously limiting him, but he's so good, it's very hard to do that.
It is, and I think, obviously great teams will focus on what the other team does poorly, and they'll try to eliminate the things that they do great. If you watched any of the Kansas State game last week against Oklahoma, their number one guy, number 22, Deuce, was the key pivotal factor on moving the ball down the field, getting the third down conversions, getting open in space, and then using his athletic ability to then move the ball down the field and get first downs and continue the drives. That's going to be much like what Bijan does. Now, the difference between Bijan is he's a little bit more of a beast, and he can run through you. He's great in the running game in that he's quick, he's agile, but he's also fast and he's physical. So Oklahoma's going to have their work cut out for them. But again, if they just do their assignments and they eliminate the mistakes that they have been making, and I think a lot of it has to do with some maybe matching up personnel on key third down situations, having a spy on Bijan, not allowing him to get the ball in space with too much distance between the defender, which will help eliminate that yards after catch. That's the key. But, Oklahoma's got that same weapon on the other side when you got, an Eric Gray, a Kennedy Brooks, they match up very well. Again, it comes down to the offensive and defensive lines dominating the line of scrimmage.
Boz, how about Spencer Rattler? Do you think he's figured things out? I know he had those boos a couple weeks back, some ups and downs this year, but last week obviously looked really good.
I mean, I'm a big fan of Spencer. I think he is a smooth operator. He does it with just a finesse that we haven't seen at Oklahoma. We've had some great quarterbacks, no question, at Oklahoma with Baker and, Kyler. It's just been phenomenal to see what Lincoln's been able to do with that position. Now, Spencer's not, a quick out of the pocket, test the line of scrimmage and want to run. He wants to throw that ball and he likes big plays. So I think Spencer's trying to figure out what the defense is trying to take away, which is the big play, obviously, because you just haven't seen Jadon Hazelworth, get the big plays downfield consistently. The Marvin Mims, the big plays down in the field. He's having to dink and dunk and keep drives alive for, 8, 10, 12, 13 plays, where Oklahoma's always been, I'd like to score in 3 or 4. So I think Spencer cerebrally trying to understand what the defense is trying to do to him over the course of the season is going to pay off, because it creates a patience inside his ticking head, so that he understands that going through his progressions are going to help him. And sometimes the check down, and what he hasn't really used a lot this year is the tight end Austin Stogner. And I think he is a dark horse in this particular game because they haven't used him, they haven't showcased him. So if they can buy him a little extra time with the offensive line protecting him, I think he could have a really big day.
Ryan, let's talk a little business. I haven't spoken to you since the SEC talk with Oklahoma and Texas moving there to the SEC. Just your thoughts, as that looks like it still could be 2025, but the future for Oklahoma there in the SEC.
Well, I think it's big for both schools. I think it's the direction of the momentum college football has gone. They're trying to get into, the marquee matchups, the historical matchups, like the SEC has had in the years. The Big 12 they've not risen to the level that the ACC, the Big 10, and the SEC has. And that's not to say that there's not great competition in the Big 12. There is, but people want to see the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Floridas, the Clemsons, the Ohio States, the Michigans, the Penn States. They want to see those matchups, so going to the SEC for Texas and Oklahoma is going to be a little bit of an eye-opening experience at the very beginning, because the way the SEC plays for 60 minutes, week in and week out, but they rotate lines both offensively and defensively consistently throughout the games and throughout the season. So they have depth. Oklahoma and Texas have great starters, but beyond those starters, you couldn't say that their depth matches up with what SEC and the Big 10 puts on the field. So that's going to come with recruiting. It's going to come with time. I know both staffs are going to do what they need to do to shore up those key areas, especially in the offensive line in the Big 12. In the SEC for Oklahoma and Texas. And they're going to have to change their mentality a little bit more, because I don't think the finesse is going to work week in and week out for 60 minutes. They're going to need to have more ball control. They're going to need to be able to establish a run and be able to dictate when they run, not the other team trying to take the run away from them early, get ahead early, and then decide that, both Oklahoma and Texas have nothing left but to pass the ball, because that could lead to some blowouts and some long games.
All right, Boz, last thing for you. I know you made some news recently with your thoughts on NIL. Just give our audience your thought on how that could be such a slippery slope.
Well, it's kind of a two-sided sword here, because you're allowing the kids to have name, image, likeness compensation. Now, not every player is going to be able to take advantage of that situation. It's only really going to be the star player, the 1 or 2 guys that are on the team that have, the kind of influence that that attracts the TV audience. And then you've got this transfer portal. So if something doesn't work out so well, kids can bounce out pretty quickly. It's also an attraction for dark money to kind of come in, because now you got kids that are being swayed to go to universities not because they love the university or they love the tradition or they've dreamed about playing there. They're getting compensated before they even get there. And again, that's going to be a two-way sword because you pay a kid to get there as a freshman. Things don't work out, or he wants, another payday the following year to stay there. If he doesn't get it, he bounces out. You just see so many different things that could go wrong. It's still early in the game. I just hate to see that it wasn't a blanket proposal across college football. And I know they can't really include all sports because most universities don't have the funds to be able to pay all of their athletes across the spectrum. So it just creates, animosity, potential animosity and distraction and separation in the locker rooms. The separation of focus for a player, like many, even commented that Spencer was at the beginning of the season was kind of out of it because he was more worried about the NIL stuff than he was, what was going on in the field. I'm not going to speak to that. These kids have already got a full plate of, schoolwork and the athletic commitments that they have to do. It does create a potential, disadvantage for the kids, but it turns college football into kind of a semi-pro league where you're paying for play. And I just don't like it. I wish they would have done it where everybody participated in some sort of, compensation that everybody on the team felt like they were still even when they walked out on the practice field, when they went into the weight room, when they went out on the field to play their games. And there wasn't anyone that was, making, some serious money and could cause distractions. And then they don't play well. And then people are looking at them and pointing fingers. And that's not what you want on a college football field.
Boz, great insight. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope to do it again.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dave.
All right, guys, our big game showdown certainly has lost a little bit of its luster. A&M versus Alabama. We've got undefeated Alabama visiting Kyle Field. The Aggies trying to snap out of that 2-game losing streak. We've got Tony Tsoukalas from Bama Insider, Alabama Insider breaking it all down, and Billy Liucci, the executive editor and co-owner of TexAgs, here on the program. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Nuño, what's up, brother?
Hey, man. How are you? All right, Bill, we'll start with you. Describe the fog right now with the 2 losses around the program. I know the fan base is upset, but just kind of the vibe with the coaches, the players, and how they're attacking this Alabama game.
Well, I think it's just one of those deals where you know what's in front of you at Alabama, and you can't, I don't think there's any motivational magic wand that needs to be waved in hopes of getting they play Alabama every year. These guys, most of these veterans have played them 2-3 times. They know what's going to happen if they don't show up and play their best game of the season. So you got to hope at this point pride kicks in. There's still a ton of talent on that football team. They can win individual battles. And if every guy kind of takes that mindset throughout the week, you might see a better performance from this football team. The question is, are they going to go out there and compete? Or is this going to be something that looks more like 59-0? Or, to be honest with you, what it looked like last weekend in Tuscaloosa against Ole Miss. Let's not forget what they just did to I think a little overrated, but a pretty good Ole Miss team. So to me, Nuño, I think it's more about just this football team playing a better ball game, eliminating the stupid mistakes, the mistakes that didn't have to happen, just being a little more dialed in, like late substitutions, penalties on special teams, things like that, missed tackles. And you and I have talked about it. You just got to see a football team that come out and play better at the start of this game through the first few series. And I think not just Aggie fans, but I think people in that building would walk away feeling a hell of a lot better. The goal is obviously to win, but they come out and just play better. And you go, okay, that looked like more like the football team we thought we'd see this year, even with the issues at QB. Run the football, stop the run. You'll feel a lot better about where this thing can head moving forward, and maybe when you get Haynes King back.
Tony, let's talk about Coach Saban and how he approaches this game. What is he saying about A&M, considering that they have struggled, but understanding there's still a lot of talent on that side of the ball?
And that's what he's brought up. It's kind of crazy that this game, the game that I think most people circled at the beginning of the season, could be viewed now as a letdown game after the win against Ole Miss. That's just insane to me, because this was the game that if you would have asked me what's Alabama's best chance of losing, you'd have to circle, Texas A&M in College Station. I think you're going to, you've already heard it from Nick Saban, already respecting the Aggies. I think I wouldn't be surprised if on Wednesday you see more of an impassioned Nick Saban as he kind of hammers home that point that you cannot sleep on Texas A&M, because it's a program that's struggling right now. And personally, I don't know how they're going to be able to, it's like the worst time to face the number one team in the nation, where Texas A&M's at right now. But if Alabama comes in and sleepwalks, I mean, this is a talented Aggies team that it's not like they're coming in and facing some Joe Schmo team. I mean, they've got talent. Nick Saban's talked about that, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I think that, his message is going to be just that, that one game a week. It sounds really cliche, but that, just really respect your opponent. So I Alabama does things to kind of motivate itself. I wouldn't be surprised it hasn't been talked about in the media too much, but the Jimbo comments, I'm sure from the offseason, Alabama's found a way to kind of pump itself up through that regard as well. They're masters of psyching themselves back up for games, but I do think that there's a healthy amount of respect for the Aggies.
If Alabama's more motivated from that quote than A&M is, to put up a good showing in front of the home fans, and I'm interested to see it. I think it's a great point, because that's going to be a real problem for Jimbo Fisher in that locker room and in that building, if that's the case. I know Bama's that's gonna be a thing, right? They are the masters of motivating themselves. That's a professional football team that's coming in here Saturday. They're not, in my opinion, they're not going to overlook A&M. They're going to treat it like everyone thought it would be, Nuño, which is that they're playing a top 5 team that's capable of beating them and ruining what they have their sights set on. So it's up to A&M to treat it the same and come prepared and raise their level of play to what Alabama is going to bring in.
Billy, I think people would have considered the offense struggling a little bit, even if it was Haynes King, taking a step maybe a little bit back with a new offensive line and a new quarterback. Now they're on Zach Calzada. But defensively, do you think last week, and the first half of Arkansas maybe caught them off guard, but last week, was it maybe they just, Mike Leach brings a certain type of offense that was not a good matchup with the way they schemed it, and maybe this week against Alabama is more traditional in a sense, or is the A&M defense really struggling?
I think the Aggie offense or defense, both. I think they're struggling a little bit. And look, they started 2 true freshmen in the secondary, and then they played 6 DBs. But if 2 of your top 6 are true freshmen right now, that's not optimal for when you're playing Alabama. I do think the Aggies match up better with a team that's going to line up and physically try to run it at you. And Bama's not going to sacrifice all that, but Alabama knows where the matchup. They're going to see if they can run. And if they can, they're just going to roll. If it's not going as well as they want it to, look at like last year where Najee Harris wasn't going up now. And then they said, okay, fine. We're going to do this then, because you can't cover our guys. And especially if A&M's not getting pressure and Young has time to throw. So I see it being a big day through the air for Alabama. And I'd be surprised if this Aggie defense, I'd be surprised if they didn't maybe play it a little better for a while, but eventually I think they're too young on the back end. There's some areas where they don't have enough speed to just keep up and run with these Bama receivers. And I think Chase Young should have a big day.
Tony, what has Bama cleaned up since the Florida game? I know it's just a half where they struggled, but where did they clean things up the last couple games to bring them back to where people expected them to be?
I mean, you'd like to say they cleaned up penalties. I'm not sure that's quite there. But I think when you look up the number one improvement they've made would be run defense. I mean, they let Florida run all over them. I think they averaged, 5.7 yards a carry. It was the highest amount of carries since Ezekiel Elliott, ran over them in the 2015 Sugar Bowl. So it'd been a while. And that's a really one-dimensional Florida team. So you pretty much knew they were going to run, and Alabama couldn't stop it. You saw a way more improved version of that against another great running team in Ole Miss. So you'd like to think, it's been Southern Miss and then Ole Miss. It seems like Alabama's cleaned up the running game. I think the game against Ole Miss, I know they let some late points go in the second half. That's more so the Alabama defense that was advertised at the beginning of the season when people were saying it could be the best or one of the best ones Nick Saban's had. I think, that first half against Ole Miss, that's what people were talking about. So you'd have to think that the offense has gotten a little bit better. The running game's kind of rolling lately. What's left of it, it seems like Alabama's having running backs dropping like flies. They're down to only 3 scholarship backs available, but they're doing well. Brian Robinson's running the ball well. Roydell Williams and Trey Sanders are also, nice options. Not everyone has 2 top 100 backs as their number 2 and number 3 options. So they're fine there. But I would say as far as improvements, run defense, and then, for Alabama's sake, hopefully that the penalties don't continue to be a problem.
Billy, I know there's a lot of turmoil going on, and everybody knew Isaiah Spiller was going to be a really big player for A&M this year. His numbers may be a little down, but this guy has been a leader for this team. What has he meant to this A&M team this year?
Well, I mean, he means they're not sitting with 3 losses right now instead of 2 for starters with what he did up there in Colorado. He's been a leader. I think he's had a spectacular season so far. If you just look at his numbers, you'd go, oh, those are pretty solid. If you watch the football games and you see where he's making something out of nothing, where the last 2 weeks against, pretty good SEC defenses, he's averaged right at 100 yards. It's not like he's getting 25, 30 carries in these games, and a 67-yard touchdown, a 48-yard run against Mississippi State this week. He's been spectacular. If A&M is going to have any chance against Alabama, or to keep it close, or to pull the upset heard around the world, whatever you want them to do here, it's got to be he and A-Chain leading the way. A-Chain had 10 touches for an even 100 yards last week against Mississippi State. He also came through in the clutch big time at Colorado, and those 2 guys have to touch the ball a lot. And of course, that's going to depend on the blocking and how long A&M can stay on the field. They ran 20 plays in the second half against Arkansas. They're not getting touches that way. So the more they can get of 6 and 28, the better their chance of hanging in this thing. And that will bode well if at the end of the game, you see those 2 combined for 30 plus carries.
Tony, got to end with Bryce Young. What a great season he's having. Obviously, he had to buy his time a little bit last year. How has the transition seemed so seamless for Bryce?
He's composed. He's so poised in the pocket. He can do some great things. I know Alabama fans probably want him to tuck the ball a little bit more and run, but that's not necessarily his game. He's a guy that's going to dance around in the pocket, keep his eyes downfield, and just pick your defense apart. And he does that with the poise of a veteran, not of a, scared sophomore in his first year of starting. It's incredible to watch him. And I wrote a story on the site last week about him kind of being like a point guard out there. That's what he is. I mean, he's constantly looking for that pass. He can throw off of multiple platforms. He can throw off of his feet like a shortstop, if he's on the run. And he's just so athletic. But, when you look at him as a quarterback, yeah, he's a dual threat, but his threat with his legs he's not going to run for 50, 75 yards. He's going to do some magic in the backfield, slip out of tackles, and then hit somebody deep. And that's just kind of what he does. It's been really fun to watch. And, I think he's the Heisman front runner for a reason. I know he's made 2 interceptions in his last 2 games, but I think that, he'll probably manage to get that under control. And both of those interceptions came late in the game when it didn't necessarily matter. So he's composed, and I expect him to continue that.
Tony Tsoukalas, Billy Liucci, thank you so much.
All right, Nuño, appreciate you, buddy.
All right, guys, let's talk a little Georgia-Auburn. It feels like we're on a collision course for Alabama and Georgia, maybe a couple of times. Obviously, the SEC championship game, perhaps, but there's still a lot of football to be played before that. Let's get a Georgia perspective from Radi Nabulsi. from UGAsports.com and obviously, WXIA. Radi, goodness, this defense is incredible. You told me a couple of weeks back that it was maybe the best you had seen since you've been there. Are they even getting better?
They are. I mean, the question was posed to Kirby Smart earlier in the day. So, what can Georgia's defense do to get better? Thinking, this is the team that leads the nation in scoring defense, rushing defense, passing defense, all these categories. And of course, Kirby had an issue. He's like, well, we don't have enough turnovers. And I'm like, well, okay, that's fair. They're not getting enough turnovers. But here's the thing. I thought that Clemson and possibly South Carolina with Van and definitely Arkansas would be able to move the ball on Georgia because of its secondary. You have some very inexperienced guys. At one corner spot, you have a redshirt freshman. At the star spot, you have a senior who'd never played it before. You're very thin at the safety spot. Your number 3 safety is a walk-on guy that nobody ever heard of before, and Van Jackson. So I thought that some teams would go through the air and kind of toast Georgia a little bit, but that hasn't happened because you can't get past the front 7. The quarterbacks have no room to breathe. Except for the Clemson game, Georgia's gotten to the second string quarterback in every team. Everybody's been pulled or injured. So this team, can they get better? Probably, if they start doing more turnovers. But here's the thing, 5 games in, and that secondary has had some experience. So they are going to get better. And if your chance to burn Georgia deep through the air may have evaporated in the first half of the season.
So I'm thinking to myself, you beat a top 10 team 37-0. I mean, what does that say? Because I don't know if we knew much about Arkansas, and we're starting to know a little bit about Clemson, but still, I don't care who you beat. If they're an SEC team 37-0, what does that say overall about the direction this team is headed and where they expect to finish?
They talk about playing to the standard, and, a lot of us in the media, we kind of roll our eyes about that kind of coach speak. And I had one of my writers came to me and said, hey, I'm going to do a story about playing to the standard. I'm like, are you trying to bore me to death? I mean, you're trying to kill our readership off here by doing that. But it is a real thing. And this is one of those times where it's not just a cliche. They are watching videos of like the 85 Bears and stuff like that. They're looking at these great NFL defenses, and they keep talking about you can be good or you can be elite. What they're trying to do is literally be elite. They don't want to be just good enough. And I've covered this team since 1993, and I've seen Georgia throw their helmets out on the field against a Vanderbilt or a Southern Miss or a Middle Tennessee State and just kind of half butt it all the way through because you're not going to be challenged that week. These guys come out and they don't want anybody to score. The second team doesn't want anybody to score. And they're playing unselfish ball. And I've seen great Georgia defenses come where, 9 of the 11 guys would get drafted. And they were a terrible defense because each guy was trying to bump up his stats. This team, they're playing within their responsibilities and within their assignments. And what it tells you about that team is they are looking playoffs. They are looking towards, Alabama. They know what it takes to be here. Again, you saw what they did against Vanderbilt. I said it would be 70-0. It was 62-0. Like they could name their score, but you can't do that against Arkansas. But they did. They came out and they could have made it worse. They decided they could have scored more, and they kept Arkansas from scoring. So they are playing to a standard, and that standard is playoff football. They haven't been to the playoffs since Kirby Smart's second year. The following year they didn't win the SEC. The following year after that, they didn't even make it to the SEC championship. So it's been 3 years of kind of a downward trend. This year, it's not, hey, let's just get back to the SEC championship game. They're thinking playoffs. They're thinking national title.
And they've done it so far with musical chairs at quarterback, JT Daniels. What's the latest with him? Is he looking better? Is he going to be able to contribute?
That's the thing. It's a annoying injury where it's not like you can just look at it one day and go, oh yeah, he's fine. It doesn't just pop back into place. He had the oblique issue, which we broke. We broke the news that Stetson Bennett was going to start against UAB. Nobody had any idea that was coming out. We were pilloried for it, but we were right. And we told folks this week, hey, Stetson Bennett, even after that pretty strong Vanderbilt game that JT Daniels had, it's going to be Stetson Bennett again this week because his oblique became a lat issue. And it's an issue of pain tolerance. It's an issue of recovery. Yesterday on Monday, he didn't throw it all. He did handoffs and stuff like that. I doubt he throws this week. I doubt he does hardly anything other than short passes and inside zone runs type of stuff. And then around Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they'll say, hey, how much can you take? How do you feel? And they'd love to have him under center on Saturday. But if not, Stetson Bennett this was a ranked Auburn team when they met last year, and they won 27-6. Stetson threw a couple touchdown passes, completed over, I think, about 60% of his throws. So he's beaten Auburn before. Now, this will be on the road, and I'm sure they'd rather have JT Daniels, but we won't know who's going to start until probably Thursday or Friday.
All right, we gave a lot of accolades towards Georgia, but let's just say, how do they match up with Auburn? You know, they had the late game heroics last week. They've had a couple late game heroics, I should say. How do you think they match up, though?
I don't know how you're going to score on this team. If you try to take away the run from Georgia, good luck with that. That's just going to be tough. But let's say you pick your poison, you force Stetson to beat you through the air, which UAB did, and he became SEC Player of the Week. So offensively, Georgia should score, but I don't know how you score on Georgia. Do you try to run right at them? That's a bad way. Do you go through the air? We've seen a couple teams try to do that, but the problem with going through the air is you don't have enough time to throw it. Bo Nix pulled off. I'm a huge Bo Nix fan, and watching him pull out some of these Houdini-esque escapes, I said this guy has more lives than a cat. But there's a difference when LSU's chasing you down and Jordan Davis is chasing you down, Quay Walker's chasing you down. They're going to put a spy on him, and he's not going to have probably as much room to get away with some of that stuff. I do think, though, that one of the most reported guys, one of the most undervalued guys on that Auburn offense is Sean Shivers. He's so fast, and he's just really quick. Everybody will be watching for Tank Bigsby, but when Shivers comes out of there, he comes out like a rocket. So when the matchup, Georgia has better players. I don't know if that is coaching staff to say who has a better coaching staff, but Georgia is better than they were last year, and I don't think Auburn is as good as they were last year.
Roddy, great stuff as always, my friend. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, I feel like it feels like a consolation tournament. You've got Ole Miss falling to Bama over the weekend, Arkansas falling to Georgia, and those two teams, Ole Miss and Arkansas, are going to be facing each other today, and we've got an Ole Miss perspective. Brad Logan of the Brad Logan Show joining the program. Brad, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man. So I don't know how to phrase this because I think anytime you get beat up by Bama, it's kind of almost expected, but were you surprised after the hot start that Ole Miss had, the way that game played out?
Yeah, I think more than anything, the first couple of drives that Ole Miss ended in the fourth down plays in which they did not convert the fourth down, I think that trying to set the tone for the game. I mean, I think nobody really thought that Ole Miss was going to stop Alabama with any consistency. I think the chances that Ole Miss had to play a flawless game on offense, if they could stop Alabama maybe twice on defense, they might have had a chance going down the stretch. At the end of the day, they couldn't do anything offensively, specifically in the first half when Alabama had their aces in the game. And of course, they did not stop Alabama. And that was kind of the tail of the tape for me. Matt Corral, oddly enough, played a really good game. I thought he made some great decisions. I thought he played well, specifically early in the game, by not forcing passes. This time last year, he was forcing passes all across the defenses, across the SEC. But for Ole Miss and Matt Corral, I thought Corral played pretty good. Unfortunately, the offensive line was just blown up play after play by that Alabama defensive front, and it just proved to be the big difference for Ole Miss and Alabama.
Brad, I know everybody loves Lane Kiffin over there, but how much was made, at least locally, of his popcorn stunt there right before the game?
You just can't do it. I mean, if you're going to do that, you've got to back it up, and he didn't back it up. And I'll be honest with you, Monday at the press conference yesterday, we were able to hear from Lane, and he was very complimentary of Alabama. I'm not going to say he backed down from his, I guess you could say, very exuberant personality, but I think that was done very quickly. I don't know that he would do that again, but let's just say that he didn't back it up, and he probably learned from that.
Both Ole Miss and Arkansas coming off a loss. This is a huge game, really a season-defining moment maybe for the two teams, because at this point, after starting off so hot, having two losses back-to-back really hurts the way the story was supposed to shape out. How big is it for both teams?
Honestly, I absolutely agree with you. I think this is a make-or-break game for Ole Miss, determining how their season's going to go, because at that point you have to follow up games on the road against Tennessee. You got an Auburn team that's all of a sudden caught live. You've got an LSU team that, we don't know what they're going to do. And then you've got a Texas A&M team where I think there are a lot of question marks too. And then you end up the season going on the road and facing a Mississippi State team that it's got pretty hot over the last couple of weeks. So I think more than anything, Ole Miss has to win this game if it wants to get to the really nice Florida bowl game, and that's where you get to the 9 and the 10 win season. If that doesn't happen, you're looking at about an 8-win season, and a lot of the pomp and circumstance from the off season is just no longer existent. I think for Arkansas, you licked your wounds a little bit. I know Sam Pittman was pretty honest in his press availability this week when he just basically said, we just don't have the talent to compete against a team like Georgia. So I think by Ole Miss and Arkansas both coming off games against teams with superior athletes, I think that says a lot about both these programs, which are very similar in the way that they've kind of been up and down over the last 10 or 15 years.
Brad, last thing for you. What is the key for Ole Miss to get a victory this weekend against Arkansas?
They've got to stop the Arkansas running attack of KJ Jefferson and Smith. Those guys have done a pretty good job. I mean, offensive line for Arkansas was beat up pretty good, but they were playing Georgia last week. I think they're going to kind of, in my opinion, I think Arkansas is going back to the recipe about how they beat Texas A&M, and that's just trying to run the football effectively. They're not going to throw it very much. They don't have to. And if they come out and run 250 against Ole Miss, it's going to be a long day for the Rebels.
That is Brad Logan of the Brad Logan Show. Brad, we appreciate it. Talk to you soon, my friend.
Thanks a lot.
All right, we're getting things started with our big guest of the week. Really excited to talk to Joel Anderson. Slate.com does really wonderful work out there. Slow Burn, the podcast. Rahil's a big fan, my buddy. I'm a big fan, and Joel's always great to talk all things sports, especially college sports. Joel, how are you, my friend?
Man, glad. I'm just great to be on with you, man. So it's grateful. I like the TexAgs, community. So I'm from Houston, and I'm just glad you had me on.
Well, I appreciate it, man. I know that you said you had an uncle that went to A&M there in the 70s, so you've got a little bit of history with the program.
Donnie Anderson. Yes, he was a cadet, retired from the military. Big. So we've got some Aggies fans in our family, and one of my best friends played cornerback at Texas A&M. As a kid growing up, Jason Webster. I grew up with Jason Webster growing up.
All right.
So yeah, man, and Cornelius Anthony. We played on the same little league football team too. So yeah, I got a little Texas A&M history here.
Yeah, we're doing it here, man. We're connecting it like Kevin Bacon. So let's start things off with Alabama, who A&M obviously has this weekend, but taking on Georgia. It feels to me, and I think to most of the country, is these two teams. Then there's another tier. You got the Iowa tier, Penn State tier. Everybody else. Is that how you see it?
Right. I think that's right. I think in that they've both shown the most strengths and the fewest weaknesses of any of the remaining undefeated teams, right? Because other than Bama running out of gas against Florida in the swamp, I mean, they've been about as good as you can expect for a team that lost 6 first-round draft picks and 8 of the first 38 selections. So, it would have been reasonable to expect a drop-off from Mac Jones to Bryce Young. And that hasn't happened. Now, maybe Bama hasn't been able to quite replace Najee Harris, for instance. But other than that, I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to say that Bama hasn't looked like the number 1 team in the country in spite of hemorrhaging all that talent from last year. I mean, the defense looks like those Saban defenses of old. You know what I mean? Like in the last few years, they've been kind of a little soft up the middle and you could get some yards on them. But going up 35-0 on a Lane Kiffin offense, I mean, with a legit Heisman contender quarterback, I mean, that's incredibly impressive. And I mean, Georgia, I mean, look, what can you say about that defense? That defense, I'm not sold on their offense yet, but that is one of the best looking defenses I think I've seen in quite a few years. It looks like a 2009 defense when teams didn't, quite spread the ball out like that. And the way that they shut down people is just really incredible. So, I mean, just on the strength of their defense, they look different from everybody else. So, yeah, I agree with that. There's Bama, there's Georgia, and then there's everybody else.
All right, let's talk about the Consolation Tournament. I joked earlier that Ole Miss versus Arkansas feels that way because they're both losing to those two teams. They were on this high rise. So how do you think that game shakes out?
Man, that's really tough because I don't know enough about Ole Miss or Arkansas based on what's happened so far, but which I mean, Ole Miss played Louisville, Appalachian State, and Tulane before what happened in Tuscaloosa. And we don't know a lot about those teams. They scored a lot. They looked like a Lane Kiffin offense. But then as soon as they ran up against an elite team like Alabama, they weren't great. And the same thing with Arkansas, which is kind of weird because we all read something into those wins over Texas and Texas A&M, unfortunately, right? Like we thought, oh, wow, Arkansas is back. And then you saw the gap between beating Texas and Texas A&M and playing against Georgia. So I don't know what to think of both of these teams yet. What I would say is that I probably like Ole Miss a little bit more than Arkansas because as much as I like KJ Jefferson, it's just really hard to be an elite team if you can't pass effectively and efficiently when you want to. And he's not a bad passer, but he's not a good one. And I think that makes it really tough for a team.
All right, so let's move on to Texas versus Oklahoma, the Red River Rivalry Showdown, whatever they call it these years. Oklahoma hasn't shown me anything this year, but they're undefeated. Texas looks a lot better, but they haven't played anybody since they made the quarterback change. How do you see that one playing out?
Man, again, it's another, I mean, I guess maybe this is the problem of the season at this point. Like you really don't know anything. Oklahoma has not looked good, and they're still the third-ranked team in the country. And that makes sense because I think we're all giving Lincoln Riley the benefit of the doubt. Like we're saying, eventually Spencer Rattler and that offense are going to, catch some steam. They're going to finally get on board. Maybe they've been holding some things back, thinking that they could beat all these other teams. Kansas State was pretty good, but, they were just like, we can just kind of, work in low gear until we get to Texas. So I expect OU to win because I saw Texas play last week against TCU. I'm a TCU alum, unfortunately. And as good as I thought Texas looked against Rice and Texas Tech, and I was like, well, surely they're much better than TCU, which looked bad against Cal and bad against SMU. And they struggled with TCU, and TCU made all these mistakes. They had all these terrible turnovers. It was like a sloppy team and still barely lost to Texas. And so I've got to think that given the talent that OU has, given, the coaching, I think that they have a little bit of a coaching advantage. I got to think that OU pulls it out, but I'm not like as confident as them as I've been in the past. Like, I don't think you could look at the way OU has played all year long and feel like, oh, they're clearly still a better program than Texas right now.
Obviously, A&M is struggling this year. Quarterback injury to Haynes King set a tone, I think, for the whole season. But there's a lot more injuries. But we're not here to give excuses. I'm here to try to get some resolution and how can they fix things. Yeah. How does Jimbo, beyond Alabama, fix things for A&M?
I mean, man, I guess the thing is you pray that Haynes King can get healthy, right? That would be nice. And, I mean, for all the things that have gone wrong at A&M this year, right? Like it's not been the season that Aggies fans thought it was going to be. The defense is still like national contender worthy. Like if you look at, just counting numbers, if you look at stop rate, A&M is has one of the five best defenses in the country. And so that's something you can build on no matter what. And then we've been following A&M for a while. I think that backfield of Achane and Spiller, they're as good as the Greg Hill, Rodney Thomas, Leland McElroy backfields, I think, of like the early 90s. So you've got a good base. The issue is, are they going to be able to open it up? Are they going to be able to get something out of the quarterback position? And that's kind of tough to say. I mean, is that it for Calzada? If this is as good as he can be, then I don't know that Jimbo can do a lot because the schedule is only going to get harder from here. But if Haynes King can get back, or if Calzada can somehow get a little bit better, then I think that they'll be okay. But I know it kind of sucks if you're an A&M fan because everybody read a lot in the last year. Everybody thought, oh, wow, he's finally got over the hump. But that's kind of forgetting the fact that you had a 4-year starter at quarterback, holding things down and being the foundation of that team. And so it never felt reasonable to expect for them to be a playoff contender this year, but they've got the pieces to still be a really good team.
Joel, let's move on to the Big Ten for a moment. Do you think Harbaugh's figured things out there in Michigan with his new staff, new identity, or is it just schedule's about to start picking up again?
So this is the contrarian in me. I think Jim Harbaugh has always had it figured out. I think that Michigan has been a really good team. He's won 70% of his games there. He's only finished lower than third in his division, a very tough division. I mean, you've got Ohio State, Penn State right there. That is a really tough division. And so I think that he's done about what you should expect a Michigan coach to do. This isn't 1984. You know what I mean? The one piece that's missing is that he doesn't have the quarterback like he's had at other places. When he was at San Diego, he had Josh Johnson. When he was at Stanford, he had Andrew Luck. When he was with the 49ers, he had Colin Kaepernick and Alex Smith. So he's missing. That's the piece that he's missing. But other than that, I feel like Michigan has done pretty well. It's just that they pale in comparison when you look at Ohio State, which is sort of in the midst of it. I mean, even for the great program they are, it's almost sort of an unprecedented run. And so I feel pretty good about I've always felt pretty good about where Harbaugh has Michigan. The issue is like, will their fans give him the chance? Will they be patient with him? Will they let him, bring in a quarterback? And maybe it'll be J.J. McCarthy. I mean, he looks pretty good so far. Cade McNamara doesn't look bad. So maybe he's finally got that guy for his system and he can finally open things up and do the things that he wants to do and, get back to those teams of old. But I mean, look, man, if Michigan can't make it work with Jim Harbaugh, then they should be terrified because I don't know who else can make them good if not Jim Harbaugh.
Good stuff. Hey, Joel, let's talk about slow burn. I believe season 3. Is that correct?
Season 6.
Season 6 is
goodness.
Coming up.
Yeah. I did season 3, which was on the Biggie and Tupac murders.
Yep.
And so season 6 is going to be about the 92 LA riots, which was sort of an outgrowth of that season of Biggie and Tupac, because looking at the ramp up to so-called gangster rap, like there were so many elements about conflict between, Black and brown communities and the LAPD. And I was like, man, there's just a lot of stuff here. I would love to expound on this. And so that's what we're working on for this season, starting off with the Rodney King beating in the tape and how that went viral and everything, and then kind of carrying it through August, April 29th, 1992, the date of the verdict in that case and when the riot started. And so, yeah, man, working on it now. It'll be out next month. I think November 3rd is going to be the release date for the first episode. So really excited. You see, I got a lot of books back here. I've been reading, what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not just watching college football. So that's what I've been on.
Hey, I'll say this. I don't know why. I always remember the Cannabis lyric about the greatest rapper of all time dying on March 9th. It for some reason, it resonates with me with Biggie. And when we're talking about the LA riots and then later on what happened with the East Coast, West Coast. Good stuff, Joe. We appreciate you, brother.
Hey, man, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
I would like to thank you for watching Up to the Second College Football. If you would like to like or subscribe and comment on it, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.